Have you ever had that specific kind of Tuesday where you sit in your car for an extra 5 minutes before walking into the office? You aren't necessarily crying, and you aren't angry. You're just looking at the steering wheel, feeling this quiet, heavy realization that you are doing everything right, yet somehow, the math of your life isn't adding up. You show up early. You stay late. You take on the projects no one else wants because you were told, since you were a kid, that this is how the game is won. Put your head down, work harder than everyone else, and the rewards will take care of themselves. But then you look at your bank account, you look at the price of rent, you look at how exhausted you are on a weekend, and a small, uncomfortable voice whispers a question you're almost too afraid to answer. What if the script is broken? What if the equation we were handed, the one that says maximum effort automatically equals financial freedom, simply doesn't function in the modern world? The truth is, if wealth were purely a reflection of hard work, the hardest working people in our society would be the wealthiest. We all know, intuitively, that this isn't the case. Yet, when we find ourselves stuck financially, our default human response is almost always to pull the only lever we think we control. We try to work harder. We look for more hours, we take on more stress, or we internalize the stagnation as a personal defect. We tell ourselves that if we just pushed a little bit more, if we were just a little more disciplined, we'd finally cross that invisible line into security. But what we are actually doing is running faster on a treadmill that has been subtly sped up by forces we aren't even looking at. We live in a culture that deeply romanticizes the grind, treating labor as a moral virtue. Because of this, it's incredibly difficult to admit that hard work, on its own, is a terrible investment strategy. It's a necessary ingredient, sure, but it is not the engine. When you rely solely on your effort, you are trading a finite, depleting resource, your time and physical energy, for a fixed, linear return. And in the modern economic landscape, linear returns are losing the race against systemic inflation, lifestyle creep, and the changing structure of the corporate world. To understand why your effort isn't translating into peace of mind, we have to look past the motivational speeches and examine the cold, quiet mechanics of how employment actually functions today. Think about the concept of corporate loyalty. A generation or two ago, there was an implicit, unwritten contract between an employer and an employee. It went something like this: give us your best years, protect our interests, and we will provide stability, predictable upward mobility, and a safety net when you're done. Whether that contract was always perfectly executed is up for debate, but the framework existed. Today, that framework is entirely gone, replaced by a highly optimized, transactional system. When you join an organization and commit to outworking everyone else, you are operating under the assumption that your extra effort is being noticed and tallied up for a future reward. But the modern corporation is built on metrics, budgets, and cost centers. To the system, your salary is a line item expense. It's something to be managed and minimized where possible. When you consistently deliver 120% of your capacity without changing the underlying terms of your contract, the system doesn't think, we need to pay this person more. The system thinks, we are getting an incredible return on this specific expense. You are essentially giving away your highest value surplus labor for free, hoping that the system will voluntarily reward you out of a sense of fairness. But systems don't have feelings. They have budgets. Let's look at a concrete example of how this plays out in real life. Let's imagine a professional named Sarah. Sarah is an analyst at a mid-sized firm. She's incredibly capable, and she believes in the power of dedication. When a colleague leaves, Sarah steps up and absorbs their responsibilities. She works through her lunches, answers emails at 9 o'clock at night, and consistently saves the department from missing deadlines. At the end of the year, during her review, her manager gives her glowing praise. She's called an invaluable asset to the team. And then, She is given a 3% raise. Initially, Sarah tries to rationalize it. Times are tough. The economy is weird. Maybe next year will be different. But then she does the math. Her 3% raise doesn't even cover the increased cost of her groceries and insurance for the year. In real terms, she is taking home less purchasing power than she did 12 months ago, despite doing 30% more work. Meanwhile, the company hires someone from the outside to fill a separate role. And because they had to match the current market rate to attract new talent, that outsider comes in making 20% more than Sarah, while knowing half as much about the company's internal systems. This isn't an anomaly. It is a predictable feature of the modern labor market. Studies consistently show that employees who stay at the same company for more than a few years earn significantly less over their lifetimes than those who strategically transition between organizations. When you stay in one place and try to work your way up purely through effort, your raises are capped by internal HR policies, which are usually tied to small percentage increments. But when an organization goes to the open market to hire someone new, they are drawing from a completely different budget, a talent acquisition budget, which is dictated by supply and demand, not internal restrictions. By relying entirely on hard work within a single structure, Sarah fell into what psychologists call the sunk cost fallacy. She kept investing more of her limited life force into a vehicle that was structurally incapable of giving her the return she deserved, simply because she had already invested so much there. She assumed the problem was her performance, when the problem was actually the architecture of the game she was playing. But the trap goes deeper than just corporate mechanics. It infiltrates our personal lives through a process called hedonic adaptation, or more commonly, lifestyle creep. When you are working incredibly hard, facing high amounts of daily stress and mental fatigue, your brain naturally seeks out relief. You begin to rationalize convenience purchases as a form of self-preservation. You pay for the premium delivery service because you're too exhausted to cook. You buy the expensive coffee because it's the only highlight of your morning commute. You take out a larger loan for a nicer car because you feel like, given how hard you work, you at least deserve to drive something comfortable. Slowly, without any conscious decision to be reckless, your baseline cost of living rises to meet your income. Now, you aren't just trapped by your company's budget, you are trapped by your own expenses. You can't afford to step back. You can't afford to take a lower-paying job that offers more freedom, and you certainly can't afford to pause and learn a new skill. The very hard work that was supposed to buy your freedom has built a golden cage, where the monthly maintenance fees require you to keep running on the treadmill at maximum speed forever. You become financially fragile, not because you don't make good money, but because your capacity to save and invest has been consumed by the cost of surviving the grind itself. So where is the turning point? How do you break out of a cycle that is so deeply reinforced by society? The shift begins when you stop viewing yourself as an employee who sells their time, and start viewing yourself as a single-person business that manages a portfolio of assets. Your primary asset isn't your loyalty, and it certainly isn't your willingness to suffer. Your primary asset is your leverage. Leverage is the difference between linear work and exponential returns. When you plow a field with a hand shovel, your output is strictly limited by your physical strength and the number of hours in a day. That is hard work without leverage. When you use a tractor, your output multiplies by a factor of 100, not because you are working 100 times harder, but because you are operating a tool that magnifies your effort. In the modern economy, the people who build genuine stability and peace of mind are not the ones shovel the fastest. They are the ones focused on acquiring and controlling the tractors. In a professional context, leverage comes in a few distinct forms. The first is specialized knowledge, skills that are highly valuable to the market but difficult or time-consuming for someone else to replicate. If your daily job consists of tasks that can be taught to an average person in 2 weeks, you have very little leverage. No matter how hard you work, you are easily replaceable, and your compensation will always reflect that vulnerability. But if you possess a unique combination of skills, say, deep technical expertise combined with rare communication abilities, you become a bottleneck for value creation. The company cannot easily replace you, which means your hard work suddenly has immense pricing power. The second form of leverage is scalability. This means decoupling your income from your physical presence. When you are an employee, you are selling your time in a 1-to-1 ratio. You show up for an hour, you get paid for an hour. If you stop showing up, the money stops flowing. True wealth, however, is built on assets that work for you while you are doing something else. This could be investments in the market, automated systems, real estate, or digital intellectual property. The goal of your hard work shouldn't be to see how long you can sustain a 60-hour workweek. The goal should be to use the surplus income from your core job to purchase or build assets that possess their own independent leverage. Imagine if Sarah, instead of taking on a second person's workload at her office for free, decided to maintain a strict, professional boundary at her 9-to-5. She does her job exceptionally well within her contracted hours, but she protects her mental energy. In the evenings, instead of answering late-night emails that won't move the needle, she uses that saved cognitive capacity to do two things. First, she researches the current market rate for her position across the industry, updating her resume to highlight her specific data achievements. Second, she spends a few hours a week learning a new, specialized software that her current company doesn't use, but all of their top competitors do. Within 6 months, Sarah hasn't worked any harder in terms of total hours, but she has drastically altered her leverage. She applies to a competitor, showcases her specialized knowledge, and secures an offer for a 25% salary increase with better boundaries. More importantly, she takes that entire 25% raise and automatically routes it into a separate account to build a 6-month peace of mind fund, and then into simple, low-cost investments. She doesn't upgrade her car. She doesn't move into a more expensive apartment. Because she protected her baseline lifestyle, that new income becomes raw fuel for her financial independence. Notice how different this approach is from the traditional, hustle culture, narrative. This isn't about waking up at 4 a.m., drinking black coffee, and running yourself into the ground with 3 different side hustles until you burn out. That is just multiplying the same flawed strategy of unleveraged effort. This is about being deeply strategic, calm, and deliberate with the energy you already have. It's about realizing that saying yes to every low-value demand at your job is quietly saying no to the higher-level thinking required to change your structural reality. To apply this in your own life, you don't need to quit your job tomorrow or make an aggressive, dramatic scene at your next performance review. You start with small, quiet adjustments. First, perform an honest audit of your current role. Are you being compensated for your output, or are you being compensated for your compliance? If you dropped your output down to a healthy, sustainable 100% instead of a frantic 130%, what would actually happen? In most cases, absolutely nothing would change, except you would suddenly regain the mental clarity needed to think about your future. Use that reclaimed energy not to slack off, but to invest in your own personal infrastructure. Build up your skills, document your tangible achievements, and begin treating your career as a product that you are preparing to license to the highest bidder. Second, reevaluate your relationship with money as an emotional coping mechanism. The next time you feel the urge to make a convenience purchase or buy something new to soothe the stress of a brutal workweek, pause and look at what's really happening. That purchase isn't a reward. It's a tax you are paying to tolerate an environment that is draining you. Every dollar you save and redirect toward building a cash cushion or buying high-quality assets is a piece of your autonomy that you are buying back. When you have 6 months of living expenses sitting quietly in a bank account, your entire psychological relationship with your employer shifts. You no longer operate from a place of quiet desperation. You can say no to unreasonable demands, you can negotiate from a position of strength, and you can walk away from toxic environments because you aren't one missed paycheck away from ruin. We have been conditioned to believe that building a secure life is an act of sheer brute force. We are told that if we are struggling, it must be because we aren't trying hard enough. But human beings are not machines designed for infinite output. Your energy is precious, your time is finite, and your health is non-negotiable. If you are feeling exhausted, stuck, or anxious about your financial trajectory, please know that it is not a sign of personal failure. You are likely just trying to solve a structural problem using an emotional tool. Hard work is a beautiful thing when it is applied to an engine that can multiply its value. But when it is poured into a system designed to consume it without reciprocity, it becomes a form of quiet self-sabotage. Give yourself permission to slow down enough to look at the map. Stop measuring your worth by how tired you are at the end of the day. True financial intelligence isn't about proving how much weight you can carry on your back. It's about figuring out how to build a lever so you don't have to carry the weight at all. Take a breath, protect your peace, and remember that progress isn't about sprinting blindly toward a destination someone else designed. It's about making small, intentional choices every day to take ownership of your time, your energy, and your life. Progress beats perfection every single time.